Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Tim Schutt. I'm a computer consultant with the College of Arts and Sciences at Syracuse University. To give a little bit of background on myself, again, Tim Schutt. It's pronounced Schutt. I do answer to Schutt or Shoot. I have my entire life. I'm not bitter. I was a music major in college back in the early 90s. Yes, I'm one of those IT people. Switched to IT immediately after leaving college and was an independent consultant in Rochester, New York for a number of years, and then finally came to Syracuse University in 2005. I'm Binkley Bloom at most places, Twitter, GitHub, Keybase, Reddit, Untapped. And my details of the presentation and some related code can be found at my GitHub repository. If you just look for MacAdmins, you'll find the project. Okay, so today, presentation goals. I plan on covering things like our first repository on campus, what we did to get to that point, and kind of the grassroots effort associated with that initial repository. Then what we had to accomplish to expand that from a smaller repo across to an entire university, challenges that we addressed along the way. And then finally, how we've accommodated Apple's new recommendations for deployment. Okay. What are not the presentation goals today? I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail about any of the individual items. Other people already have. For example, Jesse Peterson gave a fantastic presentation on micro MDM earlier today. That video will be available online. I would highly recommend you look to that for those things. You can find them on, I would encourage you seek out these things in all of the usual places, the MacAdmins Slack, individual conference, video lists, GitHub, project websites, even the MacSysAdmin Reddit, and of course, this conference's YouTube channel. Okay, so let's rewind the clock a little bit. This whole thing started at this very conference in 2012. At the time, I was working for a smaller research arm at SU. I had about 50 or 60 Macs underneath my responsibility list. And our Windows tech team at the university had started to go down the path of a modular approach to deployment, where they would install Windows, you'd join it to Active Directory, and through group policy modification and application, you could compel configuration and software to push down to the system. This was very, very attractive. Okay, and I was really looking for a solution that would work for that for the Macintosh. I considered Jamf, looked at it. It was a small research wing. I couldn't justify the cost associated with that. And it didn't really, I've always liked using community-supported tools and open source. And so that didn't really hold a lot of attraction for me. So I'm invited to come to the MacAdmins conference, and I go to a presentation from one Mr. Alistair Banks, and he puts up this photo of some guy, Greg Nagel, with hearts all around him, and discusses Munki. And as you know, we're not shocked to find out, it was pretty much exactly what I was looking for. Price point was good, flexibility was amazing, the community behind it was fantastic. And so I returned from the conference and set to work. Within a month, we had our initial repository. We were testing it with some of our internal machines and figuring out the intricacies of using this tool set. And so we decided it was probably time to get together with all of the stakeholders that had Macintoshes within their areas across the university and see if we could have a meeting of the minds on how to move forward. So several of us got together, discussed the benefits of several different solutions, and ended up with having 3 colleges, ourselves in Arts and Sciences, Falk College of Sport and Human Dynamics, and the School of Education. The 3 of us decided to join up and say, okay, we're going to start with a grassroots repository. So back and forth ensued, and we discussed best practices and how we wanted this to look, and we came up with an early workflow that is not going to be unfamiliar to anyone. We boot into Deploy Studio, the workflow set up so that we can name the machine and set up an initial account config on it, do a block copy of a vanilla OS image, install Munki tools and generic managed installs prefs, okay? Then we would shift gears and open up a second system so that we could reach out to Munki Web Admin and create the manifest, and restart the endpoint that we were going to manage and set the client identifier by hand. Now, one of the challenges with the diverse group of IT at a university, even in our small group, is not everyone is as comfortable in the command line or necessarily as familiar with Macintosh endpoints as others, okay? And so that was kind of awkward, setting the client ID by hand. We specifically wanted to set it by hand because, while we're targeting one-to-one, we want granular control over endpoints. There were cases where we did want to support clusters of machines as well. So we also didn't want to do the serial number manifest thing because that doesn't lend to human readability. So ultimately, that was my first challenge. Let's make that better. So my first optimization comes around, and I set the client ID for the person running the Deploy Studio script with a little bash script so that they don't have to set it by hand, okay? And the overall design of the script was straightforward. We're going to look in 3 places for the client value, okay? We're going to see if there's a Deploy Studio preference set. It's called client ID. If there's not, then we're going to move on to a second one. We decided on that system information field number 4. We weren't leveraging it for anything, and it was exposed on that system information sheet in Deploy Studio. So, hey, if we want to use something other than the computer name, we can tuck in a custom manifest name or client ID in that field. And finally, if neither of those are populated, we're going to end up just defaulting back to the computer name. And it worked fairly well, okay? And this brings me to my first point. You need to eat your own dog food, and you need to season it to taste, okay? What I mean by that is an unused management framework is of no value. More than simple technical challenges, you must streamline and optimize the overall experience for the IT support people who will use this, okay? Step through your processes repeatedly. The things that irritate you will irritate others, and you want to get rid of as many of them as possible, okay? Remember, we're dealing with a diverse set of IT support people, and you need to amplify those irritants because if they don't like the tool set that you're providing to them, they're not going to use it. Ultimately, this test was successful. We ended up enrolling at its peak during this grassroots effort about 400 machines. And it worked for, we used it for probably 12 to 18 months. And we were getting reporting off, and we were managing a population of machines on campus that we had never managed prior to this point, okay? Now it's time to expand it to campus because this actually caught the eye of our assistant CIO. And he approached me and said, listen, we would like to take this outside of this grassroots effort and, capture as much of campus as possible because there are many machines that are outside of our initial 3. Now, this had its own challenges. At Syracuse University, we do have a single Active Directory tree, but we're all, all of the colleges have their own separate IT support people. We all have our own reporting structures. We're all responsible for our own fleets of machines, and there's a lot of us. I think we have 13 different colleges, and I won't even hazard a guess at how many administrative departments on campus. So I had to approach this in a way similar to the way that they approach the problem with Active Directory. We have individual fiefdoms. We support OUs in our AD scheme, and the way that the Windows management is handled is I can only affect change on machines that exist within my own OU. So I step back and think about it, and it's like a change from sharing something between friends to sharing it around the cul-de-sac. If you think of it in terms of a lawnmower, you have the sweet zero-turn radius lawnmower, you know, if you and your neighbor are, you know, going in together on it, you see your neighbor's using it, you don't use it, you know, as soon as he's done mowing his lawn, you jump on, mow it down, fill it with gas, he changed the oil recently. It's very easy to manage that interplay between the two of you. When you expand that around to the 10 houses at the end of the cul-de-sac, obviously rules have to come into play, scheduling has to come into play, you have to have some kind of tracking for maintenance. It's the same types of issues, okay? So to expand this campus-wide, several key pieces had to fall into place for us, okay? Since SU utilizes these separate distributed IT groups on campus, I wanted to separate each IT group into their own interface, okay? Now this is going to accomplish a couple of things. For starters, good fences make for good neighbors, okay? I can only touch systems that are within the arts and sciences area, okay? And, you know, Falk or School of Education or Visual Performing Arts can't touch any arts and sciences systems. But in addition to that, Arts and Sciences is the largest college on campus. We have almost 700 Macs in our area. We have other smaller areas that have 10. So, you know, it's a way of scoping and scaling a system. We needed to scope it so that someone didn't have to wade through all of my stuff to get to affect their smaller fleet. So that was another positive effect off of it. And finally, when we go back to this diverse population, we want to set them up for success when they're deploying these systems. Because again, you know, we have varying levels of familiarity with this system. So I want to push out some organization-specific configuration to the systems, okay, so that I can target an individual group's fleet of machines and sequester them into their own machine group in Munki reports, let's say. But in addition to that, I need some better bootstrapping support so that I can make sure that they get started on the system in the most effective way possible. They're set up for success right from the beginning. And so with all of these things in mind, I came up with a concept of the Munki Barrel. Okay, so what is a Munki Barrel? It's simply a blend of the common and the unique. So a Munki Barrel is a Munki repository that combines common, centrally supplied and managed resources with unique, departmentally exclusive and manageable elements within a distributed support group's macOS management stack. Okay, let's break that down a little bit. What makes a Munki Barrel? Well, I like to compartmentalize things. So we've got common elements and we have unique elements, okay? For the common elements, we've got packages, package information files, catalogs, icons, client resources with a little asterisk there where if someone does want to deploy a custom skin for Managed Software Center or something like that, we can decouple client resources from the common elements. No one has taken me up on that yet. Then we have some key manifests that we're also going to have centrally managed, okay? And one of those, the foundational key manifest here is site default university source, okay? This manifest is something that stands up the very fundamental pieces to communicate with the Mac management framework on campus. Okay, so we've got Munki tools in there, Munki Fax, I use Outset, I use DocuTil. So I have those all collected into a central manifest that is distributed out to the entire surface across the university. In addition to that, I do provide some specific bundle manifests, and we'll talk a little bit more about these in a moment, but you know, things like the self-service apps that we're going to provide so that you know, someone doesn't have to walk through and add 70 items to populate the App Store interface and Managed Software Center. Those types of things we collect up and we provide that kind of as a service to each individual support group. In addition, we have some Active Directory specific machines. Yes, we do bind our machines optionally, but you know, things like Nomad will push out to those, suppressing the DS store files on network volumes, that type of stuff. And internet plugins, Office 2016 is another one that, you know, fits nicely into a bundle manifest. Then we want to shift over to the unique items of a barrel. okay? It's all of the other manifests. If an individual support group wants to create their own bundle manifest, have at it. If they want to curate their own self-service apps, have at it. They can do that. Plus, they have all of their own machine manifests that are scoped within this. And they get an exclusive Munki Web Admin instance for their barrel. Okay, so that's a little bit more detail on conceptually what makes it, but what really makes it? Well, for the impatient, it's a virtual host for the repository, and you spin up Munki Web Admin in that vhost, and then you do a symlink to all of those common elements, whether they're the individual folders or manifests. You symlink back to them to a central repository store. Now, this might be setting off flags where, Munki Web Admin 2 can go in and it can modify package information files and that type of stuff. Well, it's addressed. We're going to take that central stuff, put it on a separate server, okay, in a private subnet, and we're going to make it available via a read-only NFS link. You can do it with permissions as well. I found this to be the most effective way because I also like to modularize my servers. That way, if you want to change the front-end server, you can spin up one in parallel, and then you just shift the NFS link across to populate it. You can pull all kinds of tricks like that when you separate these things out, okay? So that's the path that I chose to take on that. Visually, because I tend to be a visual learner, let's look at it this way. We've got a typical Munki repository. We're going to replicate that, so we've got that pulled off to the side, and we're spinning up our virtual hosts, okay? The common elements are being fed from the university-wide resources, okay? And that gets tucked away in its own server. Those central resources then are linked back from that central repo storage, and off of that central repo, we can hang our management systems, our auto package server, and the like. Then if we look at it more from the file level, we start off on central where we have everything symlinked back, including that site default university source manifest. And then when we look over at the individual barrel instance, okay, we've got those symlinks. And if we drill down in, we'll see that there is a site default manifest that exists for every single barrel. And this is where we can scope the organization-specific items. So we take that site default manifest, or the university source manifest, and we tuck it in as an included manifest into site default. This way, it gives us our fallback. If something happens with setting the client ID, that doesn't get set. Site default is one of those default pieces that Munki's going to try, and it can fall back, and we can maintain some form of control and patch level on the end system. And we have our managed install, the barrel machine group scoping and managed installs. Then when we look at bundle manifests, we already discussed those a bit, where we use them very sparingly though, and very, very purposefully. And then ultimately we end up down with our machine manifests. And this is kind of an example of what a typical one looks like. This brings me to my second hint, and this might be a little bit controversial. You can paint yourself into a corner using included manifests. Early on, we developed a very rich hierarchy of, okay, well, we've got one central control manifest, and then we nest all of these guys down through, and we can have our self-service apps and our default apps and our optional apps for this department and collect that all in, and it comes down to a single thing that you can drop in, or maybe three things that you drop into a machine manifest, and it makes it very easy to generate the machine manifest at that point and have a tremendous amount of referenced items. But then when you have to separate off from that and scope an individual set of machines, it becomes difficult to unravel that. So we discovered that the hard way with the switch from Acrobat 11 to Acrobat DC, and decided that we were going to abandon that approach for manifest creation. But when we go back and we look at that machine manifest again, this is very skeletal. Really, we have closer to 25 to 30 items that we have in every single machine manifest that gets generated. And when you're generating these manifests by hand, and you've got 40 systems stacked up, 25 items, that's 1,000 clicks to go through. Not only is it very, labor intensive to generate these manifests, you can be error prone. I don't care how careful you are. It introduces a lot of possibility for human error. So that got me thinking, okay, there's got to be a better way to enroll these and generate these manifests on the back end. And so I looked to the community again at different schemes for enrolling systems automatically in Munki, and nothing, there were some very, very creative solutions out there, but nothing was quite as just simple as I was looking for. So I ended up rolling my own, okay? And really kind of took the approach, and this next hint, I'm including it because I think it's so crucially important. It will be shocking to no one, okay? Any simple task that you do repeatedly, scripts can do faster and more accurately. And more accurately really is the underline at this point, okay? So with that concept in mind, I wrote a custom web API in Python that I post data to. I just send it up with a curl command, fired off from Bash and Deploy Studio, and that includes the client identifier and a barrel ID. That barrel ID is compared against a predefined listing of barrels in a dictionary in the Python script. And then that script will go out to the associated Munki barrel, and based on the client ID, it'll create a manifest off of a template that is in the control of the individual IT group that manages their machines from that barrel, okay? So, let's go over this a little bit more detailed. The Deploy Studio script takes the client ID that we've discovered in the same fashion that we did with our Bash script, okay? Combines that with a barrel ID that I would actually sniff off of the workflow that the individual was running from, because I would scope you into specific Deploy Studio workflows based on Active Directory group membership, okay? And combine those, send it up to the CGI script, which would take that data, check the Munki barrel for the manifest. If it found it, it would communicate that it existed and quietly end. If it didn't find one, then it would look to the auto-generation template in that barrel, create the copy, name it for the client ID, and we ended up with, a very, very simple way to walk through this, okay? Ending up with pub time with a hat tip to Graham Gilbert for that little endpoint, okay? So, our complete thin image workflow ended up looking something like this, okay? NetBoot or USB boot into Deploy Studio, log in with your AD credentials. You would be presented with a subset of Deploy Studio workflows that were appropriate for your instance or your barrel. You would enter the machine name, optionally the client ID, and that system information field number 4 if it was being targeted for a cluster of machines that needed to point to all one manifest, okay? Enter the details for the initial admin account. The unbooted disk image of the currently supported OS would be block copied down to the target. Munki tools are installed. Munki barrel preferences are installed. Client ID is set. Client ID and barrel ID are sent up to the enroller, which would create that manifest if needed. It would touch the Munki bootstrap trigger in usersshared.com, Google code, yada, yada, yada. So upon reboot, the system would immediately launch Munki, locate the freshly created manifest, and begin installing the initial software and configuration load. It was streamlined. People liked it. People actually used this system. We had a lot of growth. We had a lot of voluntary sign-on. No one was compelled to use this system at SU, but they chose to come in. And, I have to say, we had great success with it, okay? We had a central Deploy Studio instance that we were managing for everyone that, linked into Munki Enroller and the Munki barrels and started recruiting. And really, it came down to the fact that the process for building a Mac had been streamlined. We reduced the amount of work for the distributed IT folks, while additionally providing them a way of managing their fleet and compelling reasons to jump on board with this system, okay? I mean it. Things were doing all right. We were getting good grades. The future was so bright. You know where this is going. Thank you, Apple. So, yeah, this was an issue. And a bunch of MacAdmins got together and gave some feedback to Apple. And for once, Apple kind of listened, actually. Okay, so we need to switch to an MDM-based workflow, okay? Really, we have to let go of block copy for deployment. And that's pretty much it. That's the only real step that we're going to abandon as part of this workflow. We can handle everything else pretty nicely another way. So let me walk through how I solve this issue. So we're going to be looking at DEP, MDM, packages, post-installation scripts. And again, my brain likes to compartmentalize, so let's say we've got DEP and MDM on one side, and we've got the packages and package information, or the post-install scripts on the other. So for DEP and MDM, we're going to do our initial user configuration if we have our system enrolled in DEP. Now we're in kind of an odd spot with SU in that if we purchase directly from Apple, we're signed up for DEP, we can enroll the systems with DEP. If we get them through our bookstore, we get a little bit better pricing, and our bookstore's point of sale system doesn't support DEP. So, you know, we have kind of a mixed bag of systems in terms of the ways that we're onboarding. But if they are DEP enrolled, we can do this, we can do that initial configuration for the first admin user. With MDM, we can also do our site-wide configuration profiles. The text loading is particularly important, as we're all aware. Okay. And I can consistently install one signed package at enrollment, one, consistently, because of a bug in Apple's, you know, framework for stacking up install application commands. So I'm going to get around that using Eric Gomez's install applications script set. It's a really elegant solution to the problem where you can predefine scripts and packages that you want to install in a JSON file, and then you install that file along with his script package, and it will, you know, go out, fetch them for you, and process all of those installations at predetermined times along the way. It's a great solution. So off of that install applications script, we're going to install some packages, okay, like Munki tools, Munki preferences, and then we're going to run some scripts, maybe set localization settings. We can set a machine name with a script. We can set a client ID with a script. But there's, you know, a couple of big questions out there. How do we communicate that client ID and name to the system? Because I had separate Deploy Studio workflows to point to the individual barrels, you know, and the client ID was discovered as part of that Deploy Studio workflow. So I need to solve how we can target both of those items with the tools that we have available. So conceptually, the workflow is going to be, you know, okay, we've got a machine joined to an MDM, possibly through DEP. We're installing the packages for Munki tools and all of that stuff. If I run a post-install script, I can discover and enroll a machine by serial number. My enroller will take anything for a client ID. Okay. I know at the end I want the machine to drop off into the departmental barrel and create the manifest if it's needed, so the software deploys. But that middle step was giving me some trouble. Okay, how do we do this? Because you don't want, you know, 15 different MDM servers that you're plucking serial numbers out of an order of 2,000 machines to assign to. That's not going to scale well. So that really brings us to the big fat question here. How do we route a Mac to the correct Munki barrel with the correct name and client ID? So what can we leverage? Okay, well, we've got some useful monkey behaviors, some that we've already talked about. When a client ID isn't set, Monkey will fall back to some predetermined IDs: host name, serial number, site default, okay? Also, you know, when we switched from Monkey 2 to Monkey version 3, we got this new feature for featured items in the App Store. And we can actually pre-populate our repositories with this data, and Monkey 2 would just ignore it if it didn't recognize the key. So it seems like XML keys that it doesn't pay attention to, it just leaves alone. And it does cache stuff locally in an expected location that you can predict. So you can probably see where I'm heading with this, okay? In my wonderful naming convention that's tremendously creative, I'm coming up with a monkey router. Okay, so what's the monkey router? One barrel to rule them all. No, one barrel to route them all. So a monkey router is a specialized monkey barrel that only has serial number-based manifests in it, okay? The router is going to use a customized version of Monkey WebAdmin that's been simplified, okay? And an autogen template that's sequestered away from anyone other than, you know, the monkey administrators ourselves from being able to modify, okay? And that autogen template is going to contain some additional XML keys for machine name and client ID. So we're taking what is a standard manifest, and we're just extending it a little bit. And then we're going to take Monkey WebAdmin 2, and we're going to simplify it a little bit, because I don't want people messing around with catalogs. I don't want them messing around with managed uninstalls at this point. They only can touch the items that are necessary, okay? And you'll see that we've got an Arts and Sciences barrel enroller package in there. All of these things work together, and they ultimately replace that third step. So you walk into the Monkey router. Once the system's been enrolled in the MDM system, it gets enrolled in the Monkey router. You step into the Monkey router, you select the machine by serial number, you set the client ID and machine name, and then you add an OU-specific barrel enrollment package that will drop it off into your Monkey barrel. So let's talk a little bit more about that barrel enrollment package. It's a package that installs most of the barrel preferences and library preferences. Barrel authentication details I like to sequester away from unprivileged users, so I tuck them into var root library prefs. And then it runs a post-install script that reads the computer name and client ID from a cached manifest, sets that on the system along with some other predetermined script steps that you can modify as needed. It reaches out and touches that Monkey Enroller API, creating the final barrel manifest if it's needed, and then it bootstraps a second monkey run. So what does this all look like in action? Well, let's watch. So we boot up our system, and we'll fast forward through the initial setup wizard. We're all far too familiar with this. Create our initial admin account, because this is an MDM, a manual MDM enrollment process at this point. This is not a DEP handoff. Okay, so this is going to drop us off to the desktop once we land. And as soon as we reach the desktop, we're going to open up a web browser, and we're going to point it to our micro MDM instance and enroll it in micro MDM. Now, through the blueprints that I've defined in micro MDM, it says, okay, well, you're going to install a couple of additional, you know, the text loading profile is going to go out, and I send down the single install applications command for that Eric Gomez script, okay? That's going to come down. It's going to install the DEP notify set, which is going to paint a nice little interface to let the user know what's happening behind the scenes right here. Come on. Timing with these movies is interesting. There it goes. So that walks through the remainder of the installs. Now at this point, the system's enrolled in the Munki router. We're not going to restart it yet. We're going to walk over to that Munki router. Now normally you will see a line of serial numbers along the left-hand side. Those have been redacted because this is our production system that I recorded. But we will look up the serial number for this virtual machine, and then we'll do that search to find the manifest that this thing is working against. Once we have that manifest, we're going to set the client identifier and computer name. And then we're going to add our barrel enrollment package. Now we can restart the system. Upon restart, you will see two individual Munki runs happen. Okay, the first one is going to be it checking back into the router, downloading that barrel enrollment package, and processing that. The barrel enrollment package goes out, touches the individual barrel enroller endpoint, and drops it off with a predetermined manifest that was created on the fly from that enroller API off of the AutoGen template in the individual barrel, and you can see it's picking up all of the software at this point for it. We can log in. We'll prove a couple of points here by looking at the machine name and opening up Managed Software Center so that you can see that everything's populated. So we go into System Preferences, and into Sharing. We've got our machine name set. And we'll open up Managed Software Center. And we have our software available, in addition to what was installed. Now, an interesting point about this. These data are sticky that hang out on the Munki router, okay? So all of those manifests stay put. So any future builds, really, they only involve the OS install, the admin account creation if you're not using DEP, and then MDM enrollment, and you restart the system. And it walks through the entire rest of the procedure automatically once those initial setup procedures are in place, okay? So in comparison to our old method of doing things, okay, we're using these new tools, starting off with the macOS installer to install the macOS, create the admin account. Then we're going to shift over to MicroMDM, where we're going to enroll the system, and we're going to install that single install applications package. Install applications takes over. It installs Munki, enrolls it in the Munki router via that Munki router API that's specialized for the router because it's looking for that auto generation template that's sequestered away a little bit, okay? From there, it's pretty much Munki and Munki Web Admin all the way through the remainder of it, okay? Some of it is going to happen in the Munki router instance, where we're going to set the client ID and machine name, and then install the barrel preferences off of that. And then that installation OU enrollment package fires off. It creates it reads in the local, the machine name and the client ID, sets some localization settings, creates the machine manifest based on those settings by reaching out and touching the barrel API enroller, and bootstraps Munki, which compels a second run, and our machine's enrolled in our Munki barrel at that point. For a DEP-based enrollment, if you look at the second row, steps 2 and 3, just simply switch like this, because that's where the DEP handoff creates that admin account and it's handling our MDM enrollment for us. Now, when we step back and look at this, it's complex. I mean, it's bubblegum and baling twine to get a system out of the box to on the end user's desk, it seems. We're passing it through a lot of systems. And, Greg Nagel himself has kind of alluded to this as a Rube Goldberg machine, and he's absolutely correct. it kind of feeds my preference of modularized systems though, because we can go in and we can target individual steps of a process and tweak as needed. And right now we are aiming at a moving target. Things are changing all the time. We had this whole user-approved MDM thing happen, not from 10.13 to 10.14, but 10.13.3 to 10.13.4, okay? So yes, it's Rube Goldberg, but yes, we are enrolling a machine with MDM, leveraging this kind of approach. So end results here. When we started in 2012 versus today. Well, back then, we had a single Munki repository. 3 schools were using it. Today, I do have 18 Munki Barrels spun up on SU campus. We had 3 colleges using it back then. Today, we have 11 colleges and 7 administrative IT support groups working against it. There were about 8 distributed staff in 2012 that were working with this system. Today, it's roughly 75. About 400 machines when we first started. We are rapidly approaching 1,600 today. And out of that 1,600, this enrollment method, I rolled out to campus in production on June 14th. In that month, we've had about 150 machines enrolled, okay? So Rube Goldberg, sure. Effective? You bet. Oh yeah, that install application command, that was fixed on Monday, which brings me to my final point, okay? Again, we're getting kind of tempest-tossed at times, or we can certainly feel that way with how rapidly this platform changes and how quickly we have to change our approach to it. So I think of it this way. Necessity might be the mother of invention, but it takes 2 to tango. And I'm telling you, adaptability is the milkman that's knocking on the side door. Thank you very much. Any questions? That went much faster than my practice run-throughs. Oh.
Testy test. Hey,
Yeah, I can hear you.
So, are you create the local admin account with MDM, right? That's what you said at the, or with DEP you would?
It's created one of 2 ways. Since we have some systems that are enrolled in DEP and some systems that we're manually enrolling in MDM, the majority of our population right now is manual enrollment. So we really need to, we just have to go through by hand and create that initial admin account as part of the enrollment procedure. On the occasion that we do have the DEP enrolled system, we can automate that.
Okay, and then you're creating another user account for the user? Or is that through Setup Assistant?
Well, that's going to be through a couple of different ways. For the end user, my preference is to bind the system to Active Directory. I know I might get booed for that, but that simplifies it for us. Otherwise, yeah, you know, they're just going in and manually creating the end user's account or running Migration Assistant and sucking their data across and creating it that way.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
When you install the OS, with the new feature that it has, when you can do packages, couldn't you do the installation, like create an account, like the admin account with that?
I tried that. What I ran into is if you trigger that, it still wants to step through the setup procedure. And so there wasn't a good way of me, you've got kind of a catch-22, okay? You can skip setup steps if it's DEP enrollable, okay? You have no way of skipping those steps if it's not. So how do I compel that, you know, that initial admin user installation package to pass down to the system? Unless I'm handling the MDM enrollment automatically. And if I'm handling the MDM enrollment automatically through DEP, why don't I just use the DEP tool set? at that point. So, you know, if we're starting off from the the actual OS installer and walking through that setup procedure, you don't have a good way of staging that user account package to install. And then, you know, you'd have to reach out and touch Apple Setup Done to try to suppress that initial wizard. And, you know, it's just like things get out of order quickly. So, you know, again, one of my big things is to keep very clear instructions also to a lot of our IT support staff that are most comfortable in Windows and don't touch Macs a lot. So if, you know, if I can keep them on track with that, you know, that helps.
So it sounds like your setup is more based on a one-to-one. It's not really for a lab setup.
It's by and large, yes, it's one-to-one. We do have lab setups, and you know, that's the big reason why I'm not just defaulting to say, okay, well, we're going to set the computer name, and I'm just going to automatically always set that computer name, you know, pin that to the client ID. I don't do that for very specific reasons to support our clusters. You know, we've got, I don't know, 3 or 4 clusters in arts and sciences with about 25 machines in each. So it's, you know, not a huge percent of our population, but it's enough that we do want to be able to say, okay, I need to decouple the client ID from the computer name.
Okay, so now my next question, I guess, goes to anybody in the room. How are you handling that, like in a lab environment where you don't have to go and create the account manually? Like, I have, my systems are not DEP yet.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I do have a small MDM running, but how are people getting around that with the new?
Walking through the setup installer right now.
So
if it's not DEP, I can't pretend that this isn't not a higher workload than Deploy Studio. Deploy Studio was kind of the gold standard for us for deployment. That process, by the time you got the system booted to when it was restarting at the end of the workflow, if you got your legs about you and you knew what to expect, you could rip through it in about 4 minutes. You know, we're not going to be able to continue with that kind of result.
So wouldn't it be better just to kind of stick with Deploy Studio and do like the hack job of taking out the firmware and just imaging until you get all your systems into DEP?
I don't think so.
I mean,
I don't
you
think
have
so.
it set up, right? But
I
just
have
kind
it-
of not
I
have
have
to be
it
going
set up,
manually setting up the min.
You know, hacky solutions don't scale well, is really what it boils down
It's just
to.
for now, since
Yeah.
you're still changing everything over, right?
I'd be interested in your ideas on how to you know, really kind of shoehorn that in, because if we could do something like that, I mean, for example, yeah, you can take if you're going from 10.13.4 to 10.13.4, you can absolutely, even with an APFS image, I mean, if you went to Greg's talk, you can take an APFS image and you can do a block copy down to the system. You don't have to worry about firmware patches or anything like that. You can push it down. Okay, explaining that nuance across the entire university becomes kind of difficult to underscore, you know, and to get reliable response from. And so I've chosen to take the path of, no, you know what, we're not going there. We're just going to take Apple-supported tools, and we're going to do the best that we can with them off of that and approach it that way.
Okay. Thank
Does that
you.
make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, for sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
Are you doing any version control with this setup? And if you are, where does it fit in the workflow?
I am not. That's on my short list. You know, I want to establish an approval process and code review and that type of stuff. Not there yet, but I intend to get there. Yep. Anyone else? No? Well, oh, yeah, absolutely.
Our environment at my university sounds very similar to yours. We're in a hybrid environment. We're binding our Mac machines to Active Directory as well. We got our first round of iMac Pros, and our scenario is similar to yours with our marketplace and our point of sale system. We have 2 systems, and of course, all of the iMac Pros were purchased on the non-DEP account.
Yep.
And so I was tasked with finding a way to teach our help desk how to get them going. And just by happenstance of me bumbling around, I actually went through the initial setup process, just created a non-specific admin account, ran the Deploy Studio runtime, pointed it back to our imaging server where we actually had a thin workflow client.
Okay.
Not client, I'm saying the wrong thing, a thin workflow for
Yep.
High Sierra.
Yep.
And it went through and did all of the binding scripts and everything necessary. In that regard, are there any gotchas or anything that I need to be looking out for that might not work that I have yet to discover? Because it seemed to work. It put it in JSS, it bound to AD, and it's reporting, and Munki's working, it's pushing packages, but...
Deploy Studio remains, well, to answer your direct question, no, I can't really give you any gotchas that come to mind off the top of my head.
Okay.
It's interesting because, I mean, we can still leverage Deploy Studio as a wonderful tool with it, just not block copy.
Right.
You know, just not image with it.
Right.
And there's a lot of attraction to that.
Yeah.
You know, I continue to kind of puzzle back and forth on you know, if that should be something supported on campus. But the big issue there, though, especially, you know, now we've got the new laptops released today. How many hoops do we have to jump through to get them to boot off a USB or net boot? And is that more or less work than just walking through the installation or the setup wizard?
Yeah,
You
I
know?
had to do the setup wizard with them being the iMac Pro. I couldn't net boot, and
Yeah.
so I was like, let me just get into a dummy account here and just see if
Yep.
I can run the runtime and just point
And
it to
just
the
point it,
server
sure,
and just
sure.
run the workflow, and then I had to manually restart, and then it ran all the
And it
pre-staged
just
scripts,
went
and,
there,
it,
yeah.
and it seemed to work. I'm like,
No,
we
that's,
might have a
think
solution,
that's still
kind
a very
of,
viable
you know,
approach to it.
like
yeah.
you said, you still got to go through some sort of an initial setup or walkthrough, but
Yep.
it so far seems to be working. So,
Yeah,
okay.
sure. Yes, sir.
We seem to be talking about Deploy Studio and having problems block copying. My understanding is the problem isn't with block copying at all. The problem is making sure that you have the firmware updates.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, there's nuance in there, though, and I'm sure that there are others in here that could probably answer this more accurately than I, but with the iMac Pros, there is a special partition that sits on the hard drive that's going to get in your way. We have 2 iMac Pros currently on campus, and I have had precious little time to actually play with them, so I can't describe the nuance associated with that.
And I would like to suggest that some of the same kinds of things that would be problematic for the Deploy Studio imaging process are going to be problematic for restoring from some kinds of backups too.
Sure, if it's an imaging, if you're restoring from like a disk snapshot or something like that, perhaps. But I don't know. When I think of backup, I think of more along the lines of file copy, which should.
The earlier versions of Deploy Studio did have an option to do other than a block copy kind of restore. I forget what
Okay.
it's called, but you could literally restore on top of a disk and you'd see the sum of the two.
Interesting. Okay.
So it sounds like the MacBook Pros also have the T2 chip, so
Yes.
it obviously just expanded massively.
Yep.
I don't think anyone was buying 100 or 200 of those iMacs, but
Yeah.
it just
No,
became real.
it's solidly on our radar now.
So yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
we have to deal with this.
It kind of pushes the issue forward.
Yep.
Don't buy it, my Apple will fix it.
Great. Anyone else? Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.